So hello, I'm Katherine Higson, and this is part of Project Hindsight's Memorial Retrospective project that we're doing. I have with me here Dale Nelson and Curt Manwaring. I've introduced Dale before. He's a longtime friend and student of Robert Schmidt. And now we have Curt Manwaring, who is also a longtime friend and student of Robert Schmidt. Welcome, and thank you for coming, both of you.
Good to be here.
So Curt, let me ask you, how did you first encounter Robert Schmidt and what captured your imagination about his work?
Well, it was 1994. There was a Back to the Future conference in Princeton, New Jersey, and basically he was doing a precursor to the first phase conclave, which I basically missed that one because I had promised I'd be visiting my mother down in basically North Carolina. So anyway, he was basically talking about the Platonic solids and how they would relate to aspect theory, which I don't actually remember that much about it anymore, but you know, that was basically the setting. And at the time in my life, I really wasn't sure whether I would go into astrology or if I would continue on in music. So it was kind of a turning point for me because I was starting to find the field of astrology quite boring, to be honest. I wasn't enthusiastic about it, but Robert Schmidt made it really interesting for me. It was the first time that I really thought like I was hearing something that wasn't like totally made up. And that was what inspired me to basically keep looking further. But I don't really remember that much about the conference. The only thing that I do remember is that very early on, there was open hostility to what he was saying. A lot of astrologers were very upset about what was being said about, like, for example, whole sign houses,
So was your background up until that point in modern astrology?
Pretty much. I was familiar with some of what was going on with, I was reading William Lilly, and just a couple of others that were old books, but for the most part, everything up to that point was modern.
And Bob was the first one translating the ancient Greek material into a modern language, and it was all new. I mean, it was all new information, new techniques, new way of thinking about it. Everything was new. And so you're saying not everybody was open to that, or how did that?
It ruffled a lot of feathers, what was being said. It was contradicting their preconceived notions of what they thought was true. And it was, I would say that I didn't, because I didn't get to the first phase conclave. I was down in North Carolina at the time. And I almost went, but it would have been like at the end, because I was on my way back up. I was driving up 81 and I saw the exit there.
Yeah, you went right by
it. I went past it. I would have had to take, I think it was Route 70 east and then to 68. Well, no, that was later on.
Down 522. Yeah.
Yeah. But I sailed right past it on the way.
But then you went the next year.
The following year, it was very palpable. Yeah. At that point, we had already, I don't know, about at least 6 translations out, I would say, probably, and it was contradicting a lot of what was said. And so they had the idea of sect come out around that time, had the different house systems. The main system that was being presented at that time was the whole sign. And that really upset a lot of people too. And it was for me, I'd lived with an incorrect chart for about 13 years. before and it was kind of stupid really, because in around 1975 when I got my first book, How to Chart Your Own Horoscope, by Ursula Lewis, I think it was. She basically brought out like an overall view of how to do this. So that anyway, that whole thing, I can't remember when I got onto that, but basically, yeah, sorry, it's just.
How did you realize that your chart was wrong?
Oh yeah, that's what I was. That's the thing. I after that I sent for ACS Atlas. It wasn't yet. They did have, I think it was Neil Mickelson or something like that. He had set something up, and I was setting up for a chart. So they had like these cheap $5 charts, but they didn't give you the degree of the midheaven. They just laid out like planets, and then they give it, a little text readout and everything. So I sent for that. This was like 1975. I think I was like 14 years old. And I did have a background in astronomy. The reason being, and I was interested in astrology since 1968, but I didn't. My relatives, my great aunt B, she would always say, "You don't want to look at that. You mean astronomy." So they kept pushing me in that direction. So that's what I knew up to that point. So I had a birth time, but they, for some reason, it was set as Eastern Standard Time, not daylight time, because I was born in the summer. So it was off by an hour. And I lived with that chart from like 1975 until about 88 was about the time that I realized it was wrong. When I looked at it more fully, I kind of knew that it wasn't right, but I wasn't particularly, worried about, degrees or 15 degrees here or there. It just wasn't an issue for me then. Although, so anyway, that's how I got through that, but I can't remember why I got into this.
Well, you were talking about that you were at the 1994 conference, and how exciting that was, and how it really, like, you were about to kind of give up on astrology in a certain sense because it had become kind of seeming just like a construct that somebody had made up. And maybe was it not also predictive enough for you, or did you feel that it was mostly just?
Yeah, I wasn't interested at all in. I mean, a little bit when I was, 14, but by the time I was 20s, I didn't care at all about personality descriptions or anything like that. And so, and William Lilly was the first person really that I think that I remember actually making these fairly exact predictions about what was actually going to happen. That was around 88 or 89. I believe Deborah Holding was the one who introduced that publication with William Lilly and with a couple other people. And it was in readable text, not this crazy like Latin, where the F's and the S's are basically the same. And so that made it really accessible for me, and I was able to read that through.
So I'll share my screen for a minute here because I have a, let's see, I haven't made it pretty yet, but I've taken all of the sort of key publications from Project Hindsight and put them in a bit of a timeline. Let's see. And we can sort of compare your experience against. So yeah, so they started, the blue is can you guys see this?
Yep.
Yes.
The blue is the print publications, the red is lecture format, and then the green are the different conferences that Project Hindsight put on. And so you can see that they started right off with the translations. Of course, like I think you said, did you say there were 6 done at the time that you went to the conclave?
I'm guessing, yeah, somewhere around there.
And yeah, I don't have the Princeton one on here, actually. I don't have everything on here. I just wanted to sort of give myself the key. So then were you heavily involved with the phase lectures then? Because he started those kind of right away as well. It took Bob a while before, I think Discourse on Method was put out, does it say 1998?
Yeah, he was doing a lot of philosophy early on.
Yeah, yeah. He was trying to, and he was trying to sort of put in context what he was translating, right? As he was like translating all this stuff almost as though it had been dug out of a cave or something, you know, like the lost books. And then I think for the first few years, he's trying to almost like see where it fits philosophically before he did a lot of groundwork before he ever dug into sort of the how-to, right?
Yeah. There were entire lectures on nothing but philosophy.
Yeah.
Same in the other, image and original. Well, that came later, but yeah, all this stuff that was laying the groundwork for basically what would later be what he would later call System of Hermes, and then Eudoxus of Knidos. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that groundwork was really important for him to do, because when you go back and listen to those early lectures, you realize how over the target he really was with what he was thinking about and how he was sort of trying to figure out how these works that he was translating fit in to the history of thought and where it actually did fit. So then did you keep up with them through the 90s? Were you at Discourse on Method? And
yeah, in fact, I did. I attended. I used to go down on the weekends in the summertime. I remember in '96. Now I think they'd left Berkeley Springs somewhere sometime around 90. I can't remember exactly when that was, but it seems to me that by '97 he was in Cumberland.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being there in April '97. I think that was around the last time I saw Robert and Robert Schmidt together. And they went their separate ways there. So
when they moved to Cumberland, did they move immediately into Ellen's childhood home, or did they live somewhere else first?
I don't remember them being anywhere else. I think it was just that house. Yeah.
I met them in 2000. And it's really funny because I moved to West Virginia in '96. Of course, I wish I would have known about them. I was like 40 minutes from Berkeley Springs. And then I moved to Cumberland from West Virginia in '98. So our timing was like kind of funny, similar.
Yeah. Converging, you might say.
Yeah. So, okay. So
I thought maybe you were related to Ellen.
No, I know them because we have a St. John's connection. I also went to St. John's College, and Bob was giving a talk in the community in 2000, and I went to it and introduced myself afterwards. And because we had that St. John's connection, we just kind of were immediate fast friends. So, but looking back on it, my timing's so similar. I mean, I could have just like literally gone over one mountain and been in Berkeley Springs, but of course I had no idea about that. I didn't know anything about them in '96 at all. I didn't know them until 2000.
Mm-hmm.
But okay. So at what point did you start thinking about that you would make an astrology software to suit the System of Hermes?
Well, there was a certain point in Robert Hand's lecture in 1995 where he was leading. I don't remember exactly what he was saying, but it was almost as if his words were kind of saying before he was saying it that this stuff is just dying to be programmed. And that came into my mind. Why isn't somebody putting this in the software? And then literally, I'd say less than 2 minutes later, Robert Hand said the exact same words. You know?
So what astrology software was available at that time?
It was a DOS chart wheels tree that Rob Hand had created. It had just like it could do it like a single wheel, and it would have a list out of Time Lords like Zodiacal Ephesus. Well, that's what we called it back then. And quarters of the moon or whatever, and it had it down to 2 levels. The thing is, as I recall, I think at first it only had 365-day year. It wasn't using the one where the epagamino days were tossed out. They basically the ideal 360-day Egyptian year. So, and that turned out to be important because if you're going into long spans of time, especially with zodiacal releasing, you are going to have, episodes or, even at the second level where you're off by months or years. So, and I'm not sure exactly if he did change that or when, because somewhere around there, I wrote my first software was Zodiacal Ephesus in 1997. I started it as Comet Hale Bop appeared in the sky, and then I kept writing. I basically what I had to do was create a component in this time that was the Delphi 2 IDE integrated development environment, basically for programming, and basically it would take dates and convert them into Julian days. And I was using Jean Mias's astronomical algorithms. At this point, I had no idea about the Swiss ephemeris that everybody was using. In fact, I started going down the path of calculating planet positions using Kepler's equation at the center, and then introducing these perturbation terms, the 4 main ones. That I found out. I was, and then I saw in the book later on that I could have used Jeffrey Sachs's algorithms, which were included in the book, and that was in Pascal. So what I did was I kind of wrote a very primitive script that basically executed that. I created it so that it basically would read and write planet positions for the sun through Pluto. The problem was it couldn't. Whenever the sun and moon were conjunct, the moon would display at 0 areas for an unspecified number of hours, and then I'd have to. So I basically, I didn't test this out. This came out with version 1 of Timaeus later on, but I didn't. That was kind of I said, well, this isn't acceptable. I got to fix this. So, and that was around the time that I found out about the Swiss ephemeris within about, 6 months to a year or something like that. And then and then I was ready at that point to start writing Delphic Oracle around 2003. But in 97, I had the first 4 levels of Zodiacal releasing. And all I had to do, it was simple. All I had to do was pick a sign and make sure that the Julian date was correct. Those were your inputs. And then you'd have the releasing, and there'd only be like 12 different ones possible for a given date. So,
and just in case somebody's listening and they don't know what zodiacal releasing is, just give a brief description of that.
Well, basically, if you have like a lot of fortune or a lot of spirit, this is the 2 main points in the chart that you would be looking at. You'd put it would show up in a given sign. Mine would be a 27 Leo, for example. So you would start the releasing from the sign of Leo, and each sign has numerical values based on the circular periods of the planets. For example, the sun would be 19, the moon would be 25, Mercury would be 20, Venus would be 8, Mars would be 15, Jupiter 12, and Saturn 30. There are some strangeness with zodiacal releasing, because once you get up to the year level, Capricorn was 27 and Aquarius is 30. So you get 57 out of the combined, but it's kind of like a scaling issue almost. And then if you do the divisions, you're just dividing by 12 all the way down. If you're doing for months, it's like, instead of 19 years, it's 19 months for the sun or Leo, and then Virgo would be 20 months, Libra would be 8 months, and then you'd have, and Scorpio would be 15 months. And at the beginning of each of these, you'd have the number of Julian days that you would lay out that had passed between each interval. So you would just calculate that out. You'd have a date input and then a Julian date, and then you'd add the number of days, and that's how you figure it. So.
And zodiacal releasing is one of those techniques that Schmidt uncovered that's really taken off in popularity too. I noticed that I see it everywhere, and it's just like this technique that's so incredibly effective. He reconstructed it from a Valens passage. I remember him talking about it years and years ago, and I remember him spending a lot of time on it and talking about these times and how you can track it out. And he did a very detailed zodiacal releasing work, I guess you would say, for my husband on a couple different occasions, and the way that he did that was to track everything that happened in your life before and sort of make sure and see how it matches up with your zodiacal releasing and what times are being ruled, when and by whom, and then taking that information and projecting it forward. And I will say, he was accurate down to the months, and it was like, in our case, it wasn't good news, and it wasn't, it pained him to tell us, but right. Down to the month, it was accurate. And anyway, I see I see when I sort of look what's happening in the industry, I see that zodiacal releasing is very popular now. I'm not sure how many people realize that they have Bob to thank for that.
Yeah.
Even for the name, because Valens didn't name it.
Yeah, and I was probably the first person in the world to look at it at four levels. Basically, in 1997, one of the first things that I realized about my own chart was when releasing from a lot of fortune, every Sagittarius period met with something really nasty. So that was one of those things that stuck out. And I also noticed that all the Aquarian periods were really good, favorable. So in that, I'm not sure exactly when that was, but that was in the 90s that I started, and we were just kind of like trying to piece what was going on and what Valens was saying about, like, well, this is about bodily matters. So was anything happening when when my mother passed away? I had the same four releasings for the lot of spirit that my mother had for the lot of fortune, all down to like within minutes. So it's one of those things that I knew, I saw these things were happening, but we didn't really have a formal way of explaining it, rendering it intelligible, as Robert Schmidt would say. So that was basically what came out, and later on he formalized it, and I don't think he actually really came out with a full workshop on it until 2007. But by then we had been working with it for about 12 years, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I vividly remember them talking about it quite a bit during my time there. And Ellen in particular, we would go to lunch and she would just show me just page after page of these periods. And she was using your formula, she had it down to the 4 levels. And at that time she was studying Hitler's chart, and just some of the parallels that you would see and just the absolute intricacy of how it played out was just absolutely stunning. And it was stunning to her, because they were just discovering it for the first time. So I remember too, you lived there for a while, right?
I wouldn't say that I worked there. I basically was living in the house, running my own software business from that location.
I thought I remember that. I
Yeah,
don't remember when that
it
was.
was from October 2006 to about a year later.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I was actually in the house with and Chris Brennan was there and Meredith Karsten. And later on, not too long later, Robert Zoller was there as well.
I got to know Rob Zoller very well. He was a fixture there for about a year and a half. So were you there at the same time as Bob Zoller?
I was there a little bit before he was.
Okay.
And then he was there later and I basically, I left in October 2007, went to San Francisco to talk to, I can't remember his first name, Mr. Graham, the guy that ran astrology.com. I think it was Mark Graham. And basically he was interested in seeing if he could use the basically the graphic format that because he wasn't happy with the ones that basically he was generating from another program. So I was he was asking. I said, well, I'm using the Swiss ephemeris now, so I think you gotta get a license from the Swiss ephemeris. And that kind of, I think that, but I thought about it later. Well, I could have just gave him my, the code that I wrote for graphics, which was basically just based on the Windows GDI, and then he could have used his own calculations for that, and he would have bypassed that issue. But that was something of a legal issue that came up back then that I wasn't sure about. So in 2007, so yeah, so I was there for a while. At Project Hindsight. I don't know. I mean, I spent quite a lot of weekends there in the summertime, in the '90s too. So I don't know how you would add it up. But it was quite a while.
Yeah.
Um,
So let's take a look at the display that you have for Delphic Oracle. Because Dale, do you want to show us that?
I can bring it up.
This is the software that I'm always familiar with seeing the display for, because it's, of course, what Ellen and Bob used. And yeah, let's just see if we can pull it up.
Can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, do you want to talk a little bit about it, Dale, and how the display is with the houses? And because I know, well, something that we've talked about is, to me, it's just so intuitive that the ascendant would be right there at the 9 o'clock, because the ascendant is the horizon. But I've seen other softwares now where the ascendant floats, and that's weird to me. And anyway, I always want to hear you talk a little bit about this display and how it fits in with the theme of Mundi. And
well, as you say, the natural display here is sort of actually coming out of the material from the 2016 House Conversation series, the recordings there. And the purpose of it was, I mean, a main takeaway from that discussion was that we're intended to, yes, understand that the signs are whole sign houses, but that doesn't imply having the houses placed in an unnatural way, in terms of always starting the rising sign at the beginning of the sign as though it's on the horizon. That doesn't occur this way. So the rising degree is tracked always on the horizon, and usually that degree is somewhere within the rising sign. So what this display does is present it as you might imagine watching the horizon and seeing what that rising degree is, and that's
like
usually not, it is. I mean, once you have the cognitive map on the sky, because you wouldn't actually see this on the horizon, that's another issue. We can see it because we've been looking at charts all this time, right? But if you're looking at the sky, you don't see the equator or the ecliptic or the signs rising. You have to get them by the mathematics behind the astrology, right? But so you get a mental picture of where these things are, and this is reflecting the mental picture of understanding that every sign rises over the horizon, and usually the rising degree is not on one of the extremes of the signs, not on one of the boundaries, but the usual display of whole sign houses has developed in a way that always depicts that first rising sign as though it is all below the horizon. But it's not really the horizon that's being depicted there. It's just a horizontal line in a chart, and the ascendant is relegated to something that people consider to be a floating point within that first sign. So it's sort of, anyway, what this does is it depicts it more closely to what you would see if you had lines in the sky, some way of seeing that rising degree, which is actually rising at the horizon. That's why it's rising. It's right there on the horizon. And the horizon should be depicted as the kind of flat horizontal line that we're seeing in this display. So the other point there is that from the material in that house conversation, we're intending to see the equal cusps distributed around in each sign, reflecting the same degree within each sign as the rising degree is within the rising sign. So it's 12 equal cusps measured from the horizon all the way around the circle. One per sign in the same relative position within the sign. And there are reasons for why that would be true, but this is like an equal house overlay to the natural circle of the signs in rotation, in the diurnal rotation. There isn't anything in this display that says, let's squish the sign down to some, it's not denaturing the natural way of things.
Mm-hmm.
So things run smoothly. You don't have the ascendant bouncing back and forth as the sign changes.
And I mean, the ascendant
dynamically.
The horizon. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is just within Delphic Oracle, it's just declaring an equal house system, which is, and there may be an option to make it some other starting point, but I think it's usually from the ascendant. It's equal houses from the ascendant. And nothing is said about changing the sign. It's an understanding that we have that signs act as, signs actually give signs, right? So the placement of the sign, circle is rotating, is the natural position of that sign, and the order of each equal sign house is given in that order, zodiacal order, but each cusp is identifying where the first or the second or the third house is by identifying where the cusp lies, which sign any given cusp is. And these are the equal cusps that are laid out, but you notice we have the same relative distance from the beginning of the sign in each sign, because they're 12 30-degree segments marked out from the rising degree. So it's the same pattern within a sign all the way around. And the number of the cusp that marks a sign makes that sign take on the quality of reflecting, giving indications for that particular house, the topical house. Significations apply to the sign that degree falls in each and every case. So you're kind of identifying the position of each sign, which we already know because they're in a natural order anyway. But relative to the first cusp falling in the rising sign, it enforces the same ordering explicitly by which cusp do you go to see which sign it's in, and then there's a whole logic that house conversation deals with bringing forth, that where you combine you work with both whole sign houses because you understand those signs to be houses. They're acting as houses, but also these equal cusps are bringing out the topics that are appropriate for each house. And so there is a logic of combining them that I needn't get into, but there's a reason to believe that what we have is an overlay of equal cusps over the natural ordering of signs, counted from the rising degree.
And Robert Schmidt talks about that at some length in that
great length
in that
yeah.
house systems discussions, and that's on our streaming site at robertschmidtastrology.com. People can access that. So do you have anything to add about that, Curt, about Delphic Oracle and the display there?
Yeah, there's also, if you animate the chart and you're just turning it around, you have this really weird thing that happens where the ascendant gets down to the 29th degree of the sign, then clicks over to the first degree of the next sign, and then suddenly you have a shift of 30 degrees.
This is in
didn't
the
happen.
other kind of display.
It wouldn't happen. It's kind of like, astrological flat earth theory, where they think, it just it's just really the motion doesn't happen that way, so the ascendant's always flat relative to the horizon. So and if you're going to animate any of the other charts where the ascendant's below the horizon, or at an angle that's not level, with the 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock positions,
It'd be like a jump.
Then it's going to make this big jump all of a sudden, and that doesn't happen in nature. Okay, so anyway, I thought it was I think it's kind of funny to think of it as kind of like astrological flat earth.
Yeah.
So.
Well, so thank you for sharing that. And then also I should say that, Curt has graciously allowed us to distribute Delphic Oracle through Project Hindsight. And we do that at a really affordable price, partly because we combine version 8 and 9 in a single download. And then, Curt, because you're not able to sort of actively update this software, we're offering it at a really good price, as you had recommended. Do you want to speak a little bit about where it stands and why it is that you're not able to continue updating it? Or, it works well for people. Every once in a while, somebody will have a technical question that we'll have to address. But the way that we have it packaged, where you can use version 8 or version 9, it seems to be working very well for people. I'll say that. But I know you and I have talked about that it sort of stays where it stays because
so many things have happened. Coming home, having to do the chores on the farm here, which there's 70 acres here, so it's quite a lot of work sometimes. The other thing that happened is during the 2010s, I had this problem where I had to keep my income below 17,000 in order to qualify for Medicaid. So I didn't want to make too much money, or I'd have to jump to about 200,000, or I'd be dealing with medical expenses, that were too much. And that was because of Obamacare. And then I came out with version 9, and then I started, and at this point I was kind of changing. I was starting to see some things, and I didn't know what to make of it, because I was still really confused about so many things, and especially politically. And I had to make my life fit within the bounds of what was possible financially. And I could have risked it. I could have tried to make 200,000, but if I didn't make it to that, then any potential medical bills might have wiped me out, and that's what I was being told. So and that was because of Obamacare. So it put my business in that straitjacket where basically I had to do some pretty insane things. So, you know, taking care of my father, he's 85 now. The IDE that I was programming in, which was Delphi, had both the C++ and Pascal personalities, as they call it. That became more and more restrictive. Well, it used to be that you could upgrade for about 300, and this was around 2001. Then they started appealing to the corporate environment, and they started adding in all these things that I would never use. I mean, just reams and reams of components that were completely useless to me, but insist that I pay for them anyway. So it jacked up the price to about from there to a minimum of about $2,000. And then they started doing a subscription model where they were doing this annually. So, and I was just thinking, well, is it really worth it? I'm not really getting paid that much to do this. And, you know, astrology is a field. People may have this feeling that, oh, it makes tons and tons of money. Not really. It's one of the hardest areas to make money in, you know, as a field. So it was kind of like magic when I dropped, you know, I mean, I was still distributing Delphic Oracle, but it wasn't actively, I would say I wasn't really actively working on it since early 2017. And the only thing I was doing was time zone updates. And I had to make sure that I didn't get too many orders. So I just basically, you know, to keep things down at a level, because I'd taken my private pension, which started around age 55 in 2016. And then I got into Social Security. So that's, combine those together. Basically, I had just basically to stay out of business. Otherwise, it would make all kinds of problems for me.
Well, we're happy to distribute it for you. We appreciate that. And the feedback that we're getting from people is that they're happy with it and it works well. And if somebody has a technical problem or something, they can always reach out. But Dale, do you want to stop sharing your screen now and we'll just go back to... So I would end by saying something like, what do you think is the biggest impact that Robert Schmidt had on astrology? But it's kind of a tough question because he kind of is the foundation for for the revival of all Hellenistic astrology and everything that exists out there. At one point, I was trying to work on a list of like, what are the concepts unique that Robert Schmidt uniquely brought to the table that like put into astrological circulation, you know? And I eventually just sort of realized like, oh, every Hellenistic concept and technique. but I'll ask the question anyway.
Hellenistic astrology probably wouldn't even be a thing in the astrology community at all. I mean, it's that important. I don't think that astrologers they didn't have any interest. I mean, at the time, even incorporating this, I mean, Robert Hand did a little bit, but I don't know what it was about that. I can't believe that he couldn't have seen the opportunity there, and he just didn't do it.
Well, I mean, it turns out that the roots of it all was in that Greek. You know, it was. Yeah. I mean, that's where it came from. So, I guess it was Robert Schmidt's.
Well, it was. Yeah, but I was talking from the programming side.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Because he was able to write the software, and I don't really think Windows programming is that much more difficult. He was complaining about, you know, DOS, you know, he was willing to deal with, but once he got into Windows, he didn't want to do it. So yeah, there really, I can't think of any reason why Hellenistic astrology would even be talked about right now if it wasn't for his work. It's that important. Yeah. Really. James Holden did do a little work, and I know that he was being considered early on in the project to come on and help with translation. I don't know what happened there. For some reason, it didn't happen. But yeah, I know that around 2011, we had a big party for James Holden in Phoenix, Arizona, and it was, it was a conference, and he was speaking about things there, and I asked him a couple of questions, and I can't remember exactly what question it was, but anyway, basically it had something to do with history of what Valens was doing, and I wasn't, and I don't know. I can't. Yeah, let me just forget that one for now. But
well, I ran across these papers from the 2006 conclave, and I know both of you were there. I remember you were selling your software at that conference in downtown Cumberland, and you must have been there, right, Dale?
I was.
2006. But anyway, I found these papers related to it, and I'll read you this little part because it kind of speaks to that, of just how important Bob's work was for reconstructing the system that so many people use now. But he's talking about this. Okay, again, this is 2006, and he says, in the first part, this must have been from some advertising that they did for it, or the information that they put out ahead of time. In the first part, Robert will unveil for the very first time the complete paradigm structure underlying Hellenistic astrology. Although he has hinted at it from time to time, the conclave will be his first public presentation of the complete scheme. And they say, what do we mean by the word paradigm here? The Hellenistic astrological paradigms are concrete metaphors couched in human terms which underlie all Hellenistic concepts and techniques. They deal with ships, temples, the marketplace, and commercial transactions. And anyway, it goes on and it says, which we call the system of Hermes. And then it says, here's a preview, to skip some parts, here's a preview of some of the paradigms that we will be correlating with their respective techniques. Planetary divination, the paradigm that represents how the planets use houses as oracles, the virtues and vices of the planets, the paradigm underlying the 7 hermetic lots, the vessel of life, the nautical paradigm that ties together all the principal significators and their lords in a natal chart. And it goes on of different paradigms that essentially Bob reconstructed. They weren't there just because the translations were done. Those paradigms were something that he was able to see in the system and then lay forward to us. And I think that's one of the things that's really sets the system of Hermes apart, is this idea that he's taking the techniques and recognizing that they reference a paradigm. Would you guys, what do you think about that? You probably haven't heard anything from that in a while.
I think that's embedded in the way he approached translating the text, because the language being used invokes, in specific cases, invokes the paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
There were a number of others. There's one that you didn't see in that list there. There's a legal paradigm.
Yes. Oh no, it goes on.
Right?
I don't want to bore you guys by reading out loud. But even like the using houses as oracles. That's another one that I see out there. Like if you go into Astro World, you'll see people using houses as oracles. It's very popular, and it's this laborious work that it's so fun to go through and listen to the way that Bob thought about it and put it all together. And it brings a depth to it, I think, that
the other thing that he was stressing early on as a kind of a guiding, it wasn't exactly a speculation of his, but he was more or less asserting that was his belief already, that there was an underlying system that later he called the system of Hermes, where all these methods fit together. Mm-hmm. And all these paradigms fit together in some way, because there are places where you would use one over the other anyway. So early on, he was stressing that early in the phase lectures. He believed there was such a system there in the language. He talked about this, I think, on occasion, and it was just clear by the way he was doing the translations. He was so particular in figuring, let's say, uncovering the sense of any usage of the terms that were there. And part of that would be seeing that the sense was uncovering the paradigm that's being used. The other thing was that he early on again believed that such a system had to have been done by either one man or a small group of men working together with a mission. And the mission was to put something in place for the first time. This is what boggles my mind. Currently, it's like asking the question, what did they have available to them at the beginning? Now, we kind of understand that there were people involved in the Platonic school or whatever. Eudoxus in particular, he's identifying as the progenitor or the prime mover at that time of this mission. But I'm trying to imagine, what was that mission really that gave us horoscopic astrology for the first time? This is a major turning point in any of the astrologies that came from other cultures or whatever. It's like they didn't have that systematic character. They didn't have the, these people used those paradigms in the texts for all to see who could read it. And because anyway, it took that long for somebody to come along, and he was the one. Bob was fully equipped at the time, and because of his background at that time, to attack the language at a fundamental level. And the result was he was uncovering all these methods that had been unknown before. Some of them may have survived into later part of the tradition, but the fact of this systematic coherence of this vision of a well-ordered cosmos, sort of, that was a Greek thing leading into the Platonic period, that they then turned things around from the philosophy at that time. This was the third point that Bob was making early on. Whoever these astrologers were, this person or the small group working together, they were doing something that was turning the philosophy upside down. Whereas in the Platonic tradition, they're working toward idealizations of like what is truth or what is justice or itself. They're looking for these eternal verities. Whereas the astrology people, who were apparently well equipped with all the philosophy and the mathematics to do what they were doing, they were turning it on its head. They were looking for the transient, the momentary realities in our experience, rather than the eternal verities that were hard to reach and sort of a philosophical reaching up in some way. This is the horoscopic astrology is working from whatever's up there down to our level of experience. So they're not eternal verities in the same sense. They are contingencies that we find within our life. And that had never been done before. That was another main theme from the earliest phase lectures. And I think he succeeded in laying out what that system is, at least to the degree that he did succeed. There was the cosmological model. He began to talk about it, but then, it's always this side. The system of Hermes was the vision that he had at the beginning. It didn't have that name until it was like pretty late in the game. Where would you say that term, Curt? Where was that first applied? It would have been something that you already incorporated.
5 or 6, somewhere around there.
Okay.
Yeah. Before, astrology was basically just a bunch of different techniques, all unrelated to each other.
And one of the things that I was thinking about when Dale was talking too is, yeah, Bob noticed that the system was too cohesive to be an eclectic system, and that it was a cohesive system. And one of his favorite phrases that I remember him saying was the quote, "Great ideas have great beginnings." And, you know, this is definitely a case of that. You know, great ideas have great beginnings. But now, did he get pushback on that too? I feel like I remember people really pushing back and saying, no, it's an eclectic system. It's not a cohesive whole. It's eclectic. Am I remembering that right?
I'm thinking that's an expression of the kind of pushback he was getting because of things that he was discovering. They didn't, you know, generally speaking, it's a challenge to the current story. Somebody who is, you know, spent decades doing modern astrology is going to be somewhat, I don't know, surprised and perhaps upset and perhaps even angry at thinking that, you know, I've at this late stage I've been doing things, even though they may be doing things that for them have worked all along to whatever degree of, you know, certainty they have about the results of their work. I mean, if they're in the field professionally, they're happy with something that they have put together, gleaned from the tradition as received. But still, some people were going to, I mean, you know, you feel like it's an affront. And then you begin to think that it's, you know, can I say fake news or something like, you know, there was the claim that he was reading between the lines and making things up because I don't know where they would get that idea.
Yeah, just the opposite. Yeah. I mean, it was basically, I mean, the way I saw it, astrology was a bunch of unrelated, completely different techniques, randomly selected because somebody did some observation, you know, and that was kind of the idea. And then you had this one man who came forward and said, no, this is how these techniques all fit together. This is why they were set, where it comes from, and it threw everything that astrologers thought they knew out the window. And the reaction was just palpable. By 1995, I remember in that conference, there was, I mean, some people were fascinated by it, so much so that there was someone, I don't remember who, said, why doesn't Rob Hand just, you know, sit down and let Bob speak? You know, this was like,
oh, right.
You remember that incident, Dale?
I remember it being told. I wasn't there.
Okay, yeah.
So,
yeah, yeah, that was kind of a shocking incident.
Was that in the second conclave?
It was incredibly rude to say. I mean, but yeah. I don't know why what would possess somebody to even say it, even if they were thinking it. But that was what was said, and you know, and you know, it was fairly early on that I realized that Robert Schmidt was the brains behind the operation, and so although I have enormous respect for Robert Hand too. He helped me out in the beginning with the programming, you know, to what direction to take, you know, who was doing what, you know, and so on. So, but yeah, so.
Was that, Curt, the second conclave where that incident occurred?
That was the second one. That was my first conclave. I missed the first one. Yeah. Although I was at the preview in Princeton, which was just literally days before it. We left on a Sunday. I went down to North Carolina, and they went into Cumberland to start the first phase conclave.
What did they call the preview that they did in Princeton?
It was called the Back to the Future Conference.
Okay.
And a bunch of well-known astrologers there, Nick Campion.
So the preview in Princeton, that one you were at, how many days was that?
It was like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday that I remember. I don't think I was there Thursday. So it was just the weekend, the evening on Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday. And
then I don't think I found out from you how you actually first even came to know about Robert Schmidt. Did you see
well,
an ad?
I met him in Princeton.
That's right.
At first.
You were there anyway.
I'd never heard of it before that, so
Okay.
but that was, yeah.
I got you.
I did hear a project, the project being started through the NCGR newsletter about a year before, but I hadn't actually subscribed at that point. I did that summer in '94, so I was about a year late. But I was working the night shift at Elmcrest Children's Center, so, and I had, I mean, as long as the kids were sleeping, I was fine to, read and between checking beds and so on. So that's basically what I was doing on the late nights there for several years, was reading through those translations that Bob and Schmidt and Zoller did, and that basically lasted for many years like that. It wasn't until about 2005 or 2006 that I actually quit and did this full time. So.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for talking with me today. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Likewise.
You're here. Yeah.